Sacramento's East Area rapist has been active for 16 months, 15 victims. At first, a single investigator worked the case full-time. Now, several people are involved. The pressure to catch this man has been mounting, but a multi-rapist often acts on impulse.
Most of the multiple rapists attack on impulse, and so they have no predetermined point of attack. There is no way to calculate a pattern of where they're going to strike next, or the type of place they're going to strike next, or who their next victim is going to be.
Many of those involved with the case say the East Area rapist lives within the area where he operates, that he picks upon blocks of homes within neighborhoods, jumping from one to the other. One of his few mistakes was to attack a woman who lived only one block inside Sacramento's city limits and then steal her car, which only brought in the city's rape detail and 4 more people to work toward catching him. It takes a while for a community to wake up. Sacramento was no exception. By late fall, when the East Area rapist began claiming 2 and 3 victims a month, citizens began buying everything they could think of to protect themselves. Gun sales are way up, with some of the buyers not that familiar with how to use firearms, and that can be dangerous. Local burglar alarm distributors report a run on alarm systems, with technicians backlogged for days in an effort to keep up with demand. And locksmiths. First there were inquiries, then outright orders to make metropolitan homes safer. According to the man who heads the investigation to catch Sacramento's East Area rapist, better locks are the most sensible approach.
There are 2 things unknown about the rapist currently terrorizing Sacramento. One is he has never been caught in a home where there was a man present. The other is he's never been in a home where there has been a big dog present.
In only 2 cases have there been dogs in a home invaded by the East Area rapist. One of them was a puppy, the other a poodle. In both cases, the rapist was very upset they were even on the premises. What else can you do? A recent rape victim had precious seconds to telephone for help. She dialed operator. Unfortunately, the operator did not come in on the line. Even when calling the local sheriff's office, when all circuits are tied up, the number still rings in an annex and cannot be heard or answered until a line clears. A better tip might be to call your next-door neighbor who can immediately be on his way to help, while someone else in his household calls the law.
Good afternoon, and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. Today, we are continuing on in our series on the Golden State Killer. When we left off, he was known as the East Area Rapist, and his crimes were focused in the Sacramento area and began trickling down southwards. If you haven't watched part 1 and 2 yet, please do so. They are linked in the description box below. Now, we are discussing his final phase, as we know so far, and that is in his Southern California attacks between the latter half of 1979 and 1986. Let's get into it. We left off in the summer of 1979 before he took his second summer break in a row. In the fall, he had moved to Southern California in the Santa Barbara area. At first, his series of crimes were not originally linked to the East Area Rapist, and it wasn't until much later that his crimes were linked via DNA evidence. At first, he was dubbed the Night Stalker, but serial killer Richard Ramirez had also received the same nickname, so to differentiate between the two, our killer was given the prefix original for Original Night Stalker. October 1st, 1979 in Goleta, the weather was hot and humid. A young couple slept with their windows open, trying to capture a breeze. They woke, not to the uncomfortable temperature of the room, but to a blinding flashlight pointed at their faces. A voice from beyond the light ordered them to roll onto their stomachs. Then he ordered the woman to tie up her boyfriend using a ligature tossed at her. The man growled at her in a strange, forced whisper to tie it tight or she would be killed. The man then tied her. Neither of them had gotten a good look at their intruder. The man demanded money and began rummaging through doors and slamming them shut. What seemed like a century later, he returned to the room, forcing the woman onto her feet and to walk to the living room. He forced her onto the floor and threw a pair of shorts over her head to prevent her from watching his movements. He went over to the kitchen and continued the opening and closing of drawers, cupboards, and the fridge. He sounded like he was pacing and then began chanting to himself, "I'll kill him. I'll kill him. I'll kill him." Like he needed to encourage himself. While he was pacing and chanting, the woman managed to wiggle out of her bindings and took off running out the door of the house. She screamed, that kind of blood-curdling scream that movies can never quite capture, alerting her neighbors. Her boyfriend, still in the bedroom, had been able to hop out of the back door. When he got close to shrubbery in the backyard, he dropped and rolled behind an orange tree, narrowly missing a frantic beam of flashlight. It was the assailant, searching. The next-door neighbor of the couple was an FBI agent. He had been enjoying the quiet evening, trying to finish a book, when he was alerted to the screams. He grabbed his firearm and ran out the front yard. In his peripheral, he saw movement, and his vision flicked to a man furiously biking away from the chaos. The neighbor got in his car and pursued the man. The man dumped the bike, along with a steak knife, and dove between houses. The agent attempted to maintain vision, but eventually gave up. There was, after all, an entire brigade of deputies on their way. They would surely capture him. The couple only had a broad description of the suspect. White, dark hair, maybe 5'10" or 11. The FBI agent didn't have much to add. He hadn't been wearing a mask. He wore a plaid shirt, jeans, and tennis shoes. The FBI agent received a lot of backlash from local cops for not shooting the assailant, but he stood his ground, saying he didn't know what had happened in the house yet, if the suspect had a weapon, or if he had even been the suspect that had attacked his neighbors. He didn't feel he could just open fire based on the information he had at the time. However, if he had known what he knew now, he said he would have fired. This was also the first attack in the area. He had no idea this would be the first of many murders. The bike had been stolen from a nearby home, and the steak knife had come from their kitchen. The couple had been certain that the intruder had every intention of killing them, and had he not given them time to slip out of their bindings, he would have succeeded. This seemed like a piece of information that their attacker also ascertained, because he never made that mistake again. After all this, there were no more witness accounts of his crimes. There were only crime scene reconstructions. He struck next in Goleta on December 30th, 1979, and his victims were Dr. Robert Offerman and his new girlfriend, Dr. Deborah Manning. The next victims were a married couple, Charlene and Lyman Smith, in March 1980 in the Ventura area. Lyman was soon to be an appointed judge, and the police felt it was a targeted attack. Charlene had an unusual knot used to bind her wrists. This briefly brought him the moniker the Diamond Knot Killer. In August, it was another married couple, Keith and Patrice Harrington in Dana Point. The following victim was in Irvine. She had been home alone and thought to be bludgeoned to death. She was also married, but her husband was in the hospital. Although he had a solid alibi, he was still the lead suspect in her murder. Years later, his second wife would say that for many years following, they would often receive hang-up calls and occasionally threats. She truly felt that she would be next until the day of his capture. Even decades after the last attack, victims would often be tormented with hang-up calls or taunts like, "Remember when we played?" He enjoyed their change of tone when they recognized his voice. He wanted them to know that he was still out there, alive, free. One victim could hear a woman and child in the background and knew he was out there, living his life with a family. Investigators were certain he still lived locally. One woman had started a new job waitressing at Denny's. During a seemingly uneventful shift, she answered the restaurant's phone, and the caller threatened to attack her again. Police theorized that her attacker had coincidentally dined at the restaurant and then later called her to harass. Around Christmas, one victim received a call that said, "Merry Christmas, it's me again." His crimes in the 1980s became fewer and further between. At this point, it is unclear if there are more crimes attributed to him that just haven't been connected yet, or perhaps he had had a change in personal life that was putting a damper on his ability to be as prolific as he once had been. In July of 1981, there were 2 more victims, bringing the total of his Southern California crimes to 10 and 11. Sherry Domingo was temporarily staying in a deceased relative's house while it was in the process of being sold. Her ex-boyfriend, Greg Sanchez, was also a victim. The two had been separated for several months when he went to see her for dinner. This attack, more than the others, seemed like a crime of opportunity. Greg was a young, fit, and based on the scene, it looked like he gave one hell of a fight. He suffered a gunshot wound to the cheek and continued to fight on, but ultimately was bludgeoned to death. This was his last attack on a couple. A piece of evidence had renewed hope for capture. Flecks of paint recovered at the scene. The Cal Real shopping center was being developed around the time of the murders. The development was in its final stages of construction at the time of the Offerman Manning murders, which would have included painting. However, this lead hasn't panned out. Taking on couples was posing to be more of a challenge than it had been earlier on in his career. He was having too many close calls. People fighting for their lives weren't as easy to incapacitate. The men kept getting closer and closer to getting the upper hand. After the Domingo Sanchez murders, he disappeared for 5 years. His last known victim was a teenager named Janelle Cruz. Her family was on vacation in Mexico, and Janelle was at home alone. She was raped and beaten with such overkill that she was unrecognizable. This case wasn't thought to have been connected initially, but it was linked by DNA years later. It had broken a 5-year hiatus, and Janelle had seemingly no connection to any of his other victims in the area. Janelle had multiple men coming in and out of her life, and it had seemed that one of them had been more likely to have killed her in a jealous rage, but the evidence couldn't connect any of them. Janelle's house was less than 2 miles from the 7th murder, so it was likely he had stalked the area before. It, like many of his other victims' homes, backed onto a drainage canal and trail area. Police had one suspect in mind for the Southern California murders. He was a Goleta local, a career criminal, but he was killed when he tried to buy guns and drugs in Mexico, and it had been a setup. He died in 1982, and with the slaying of Janelle Cruz in 86, this eliminated him as a suspect. They had also been so certain it was a local resident of Goleta that they never really looked elsewhere. Like the crimes in Rancho Cordova, Goleta had the San Jose Creek running adjacent to residential neighborhoods, the first 3 houses he hit along the creek, providing a prowler with ample coverage to observe unnoticed in the dark, allowing him to completely bypass the need to venture into the neighborhoods themselves and risk being seen or captured. Also, much like his other crimes in Sacramento, there were many tiny details that indicated his presence, only to be realized in retrospect. Janelle Cruz was the final victim. Many investigators were certain that he was dead. There had been a burglar who had been shot by an armed homeowner, and they had hoped that he'd been their guy. Sexual predators never truly stop. They have to be stopped. He began to be forgotten about. No one wrote about the unsolved, unconnected crimes for decades. And that's going to be where we're going to end today's video. In our final part, we will unveil our man, compare timelines of his life and his crimes, and go into how he was finally connected. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and please comment down below what case got you interested in true crime. For me, I think it was JonBenet Ramsey. Please subscribe if you like this video because I make more videos like this weekly. Thank you for everyone who has followed the links in the description box and donated. I really appreciate it, and it helps the channel grow. I really appreciate your kind words and the level of research I've done for this. And that's all for me. I will be getting the finale up very soon. Thank you all for your support for this multi-part series. I will see you very soon. Bye.